All right, go ahead, Kiersten.
Okay, let me click the 100 times that I have to click in order to get this going. Okay, I'm sure you'll let me know if you don't see my slides.
We're good.
All right, excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Like Ali said, I'm going to give you a short rundown of the Presto and Iceberg REST catalog integration that the official support was delivered in a PR. I think we're like half a year ago now. So it's been a while, but there's actually been a lot going on around the REST catalog in general. So this was actually great timing to, explain a little more about it, what went into it, and also just sort of generally what the Iceberg REST catalog is. But first, I guess, quick introduction of myself. My name is Kiersten. I am an open source software developer at IBM, and you may know me from such roles as Slack question answerer, workshop presenter. You may have seen me somewhere in the last year or so, but occasionally I do actually get to write code as well. So yeah, let's just jump into it. I don't think I'll need the whole hour, but I do have a tendency to talk, so please feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. So here's just a short agenda. I'm going to cover what an Iceberg catalog is, sort of at the basic level, to provide some context for what the REST catalog is. I will have a short slide about the actual implementation of adding that support for the REST catalog to Presto, which, spoiler alert, was actually quite simple to do. We'll get into a little more about why that is. And then, yeah, time permitting, I have a demo, just a really simple one of how the REST catalog works with Presto. And it is something that you'll be able to, I should find a good way to share that, because if you're interested in playing around with it on your own time, it all should be easy to do on your own local machine. All right. Anyway, without further ado, what is an Iceberg catalog? So Iceberg catalogs do not a whole lot, I guess, in the grand scheme of actual the Apache Iceberg library code, but they are responsible for keeping track of a very important set of metadata. Not the full amount of metadata that you might be aware of with Iceberg, but essentially just the table names and schema names. In Iceberg, schemas, as we know them in Presto, are actually called namespaces, so I might use those interchangeably. But it keeps a list of those things, as well as a pointer for each table to the location of the current metadata file, and that would be like the snapshot file if you're familiar with Iceberg metadata. Everything else, all that other metadata that Iceberg keeps, as you're likely familiar, is done in alongside the data storage. So typically you have your metadata folder for Iceberg tables co-located with the data for that actual table. But clearly, what I'm trying to sort of highlight here is Iceberg really tries to minimize what this concept of its catalog does and is responsible for, just because that makes it much easier to scale as your data and your metadata gets larger and larger. That being said, it does have to do it's still responsible for some things. One of those things is it's responsible for the atomicity of the atomic swap that happens when you're actually, going from one version of metadata to another. And, naturally, if it's keeping track of these table names and namespaces, it has to be able to list those things, when it's queried, it has to be able to create a table or a namespace, drop a table or a namespace, things like that. And this is a list of at the very bottom part here is a list of the catalogs that are available with open source Iceberg. So we have REST, JDBC, Nessie, Hive-like catalogs, which is the Hive Metastore and Glue, DynamoDB, which is one of lesser used today, or you can write your own custom catalog implementation. Iceberg provides the interface that you would need to implement in order to make your own custom catalog. You're probably not going to be contributing that catalog back into the Iceberg project, but nonetheless, everything is there available for you to, write your own if you have some special custom needs. And every catalog typically has like a set of configuration properties that they all share. They all need to know the location of the actual data, the data warehouse. You'll also usually need to provide the location for, how to access the catalog, because, your engine needs to know how to access the catalog to get that list of tables and schemas and the location of such. But every catalog, being different, also has its own, specific set of properties that might apply to it as well. So, for Nessie supports like branching and tagging. So, they have a ref property. The REST catalog supports OAuth 2. So, there's token property, credentials property, things like that. So we have various ways of, configuring a catalog depending on what catalog you're using, but also, every processing engine also has a different way of configuring that connection to the underlying catalog as well. And this is a big part of what actually motivated the Iceberg community to adopt the REST catalog. But I will come back to that part in a bit. Also, just wanted to cover real quick, separate from the REST catalog, not separate, but this applies to, when you're connecting any Iceberg catalog to Presto, you want to use Iceberg tables with Presto, you need essentially 3 prerequisites. You're going to have to set up your catalog service. So, this might be a Hive Metastore that you have to set up, a REST server that you have to set up, Nessie service. You get the point. You also, of course, have to set up your storage. Your storage probably already exists, I would imagine, but that's where all your data is. So that's a key piece. And then finally, in order to actually make that connection to Presto, you need to create a properties file and add information to Presto so that Presto knows how to talk to both the catalog service and the storage. And these last 2 pieces are, clearly like things you would need when you're connecting any data system to Presto. That's not unique to Iceberg, but that first piece is really key to highlight here. So you're going to have to set up some sort of service to keep track of your tables. And in Presto, the implementation of the Iceberg connector is sort of split into 2 tracks almost. One track is for sort of the Hive Metastore-like catalogs, which is of course the Hive Metastore and Glue, which is an Amazon product. And then the other track is what are referred to as native catalogs. And native catalogs are just those catalogs that were essentially created for Iceberg specifically. And when Iceberg came onto the scene, Hive Metastore, of course, already existed for Hive tables. And it was sort of I don't want to say convenient, but Iceberg needed something like the Hive Metastore. The Hive Metastore already existed, so a lot of effort was put into trying to make that work. To have Hive Metastore sort of speak the language of Iceberg catalog, and of course it does work. It's a very popular choice, but it means there's a lot of like extra special logic that has to be included in order to get those 2 technologies to work together. Whereas with native catalogs, sort of much simpler. in most cases, because everything was built for Iceberg, from the ground up. All right, so finally to the actual REST catalog itself. So as I mentioned, the REST catalog it evolved out of this need, or want, I should say, to sort of make consistent the way that engines can interact with Iceberg catalogs. So for an example here, like on one side of the spectrum, we have our processing engines or our library code, the things that's interacting with Iceberg itself. And that might be, of course, Presto, that might be Spark, that might be Java code that you're writing, or Python code or Rust code, any number of ways that you can talk to an Iceberg table. So if you can sort of consider that like one column of considerations. And the second column is just all of the different catalog options. So what I've already mentioned, Hive Metastore, Nessie, Glue, REST, of course, now. But all of these things, they sort of have an all-to-all relationship with each other. So, Presto, before this REST catalog implementation, Presto has an implementation for those that want to use the Hive Metastore. It has one for those that want to use Glue. It has one for those that want to use the Hadoop or file system catalog. And that doesn't just go for Presto, it goes for, any processing engine has a way to talk to all of these different catalogs. And that, of course, as you can imagine, leads to a lot of duplicate code in a way. It also leads or can lead to, bugs. The more code duplication you have, the more likely that, bugs are going to be inadvertently introduced. The more likely that, functionality will start to inadvertently diverge. So it just got to be a lot to manage, especially as, Iceberg adoption is certainly not slowing down. If anything, it's ramping up a great deal. So we're likely to see, more and more catalog implementations, even custom ones, than we have just in the last few years. So this is where REST comes in. The Iceberg community developed it's a common interface, a common API for interacting with an Iceberg catalog. And this is where terminology can get a little confusing, because the Iceberg REST catalog really isn't a catalog in the same way that the other Iceberg catalogs are. It's not like a standalone catalog. It's really just a spec, just like, the Iceberg table spec is, that sets out rules and endpoints for you to interact with any underlying catalog. So a REST catalog is always backed, one layer down by some other catalog, whether that's the Hive Metastore or JDBC or your custom catalog implementation, whatever it is. So one of the consequences of this that is great is that, if you do have a custom catalog that you want to use, and say you also wanted to use Presto to contact it, before you would have to, extend Presto, implement a connector for it, and maintain that, and that potentially could be non-trivial. With the REST catalog, since Presto now speaks REST, essentially, the Iceberg REST protocol, you can hook in your custom catalog implementation to your REST server that implements the endpoints. And now you can use Presto with this, custom catalog. Essentially, REST is sort of acting as a wrapper. Your REST server is acting as a wrapper around it. So obviously this delivers a lot of flexibility, but there's other slightly less obvious benefits to this as well, one of which being like version maintenance becomes a lot easier. So, if you had a Spark engine that was on version like 1.4 of Iceberg, Presto's on version 1.5 of Iceberg, and then your REST server is on the latest version, that is no longer a problem compared to what it was before. That's fine, because we're introducing that layer of separation between the storage and the compute. You don't really need to make sure all those versions are matching and compatible. But plenty of other benefits as well. A lot of new features are enabled when we add this extra layer of indirection, as is always the case when that happens. So multi-table commits, commit deconfliction so that you have fewer retries, fewer failures. You can do lazy snapshot loading, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these features, for full disclosure, I don't believe are fully baked yet. But nonetheless, the Iceberg community is heavily working on implementing these things, and in fact has, publicly stated that as development continues, they're going to prioritize the REST catalog for delivering new features and things like that. And in fact, version 3 is already in development, and that's going to add some additional endpoints to help with extensibility and other custom behaviors. REST also supports authorization via pluggable OAuth 2, so that is also a fairly novel feature, just as far as adding a lot of flexibility around authorization. And there's plenty more. I would definitely, if you're interested, encourage you to search out. I have it linked here, but if you just search Iceberg REST spec, you can find this GitHub page that I'm linking to, and it is very extensive, very well documented. So if you're interested in the endpoints and what they do, definitely check that out, because it's thorough. So this is all great news, right? We're enabling a lot of new features due to this extra layer of indirection. The caveat of that is, of course, there is a challenge, and I would say that would be actually, you still have to stand up this REST server, and that's still your responsibility. So there are several ways to do this. You can, of course, stand up your own REST server that implements the endpoints as given in the Open API spec. You can, from there, if you go that route, from there you can either hook in an existing catalog implementation like JDBC, or a custom one that you've written yourself. There are also currently a few open source options for REST catalog services. I should edit this slide to specify that these are all open source offerings. And the second sub bullet point here. So Apache Gravitino is one of them. And in fact, this is sort of exciting, because had I given this talk back in February or March, whenever this PR was merged, I don't think any of these projects were open source at the time. So this is, again, great timing, and sort of gives you an idea of how much has happened in the community around the REST catalog just in the last 6 months to a year. So anyway, Apache Gravitino is more of like a proxy style REST server for either an underlying JDBC or Hive Metastore catalog. Apache Polaris includes both a REST service and a catalog implementation of its own. I think and by that I'll call that like the Polaris catalog. I don't think they currently offer an ability to hook in other underlying catalogs that work with their service, but I'm not 100% sure about that. There is the Unity catalog, which also comes with a pre-installed REST service. Currently, I believe that is read only and only for certain use cases, but I know they do have an open issue for expanding their supported endpoints. Tabular also provided an open source Docker image that's essentially a light wrapper around a JDBC catalog. And you can also extend that as needed. I know some people have gotten it working with the Hive Metastore. And I did with the caveat here that probably I don't think this is intended for production, but it's a really great test environment, and that's what I'll actually be using today in our demo. So you can sort of see how a proxy REST server is working in action. And there are also proprietary services that you can buy, probably just as many as there are open source options here, but I don't cover those here as I'm an open source developer after all. But so you'll notice a lot of these are more of the proxy style of REST catalog than maybe a full-fledged full-featured implementation from scratch. And I think that makes perfect sense. This is brand new. People that are using Iceberg are of course already using a catalog. It's not exactly trivial to stop using that catalog that you're already using and start brand new with a new one. So I think for the coming few months, a lot of these will be proxy styles because you're wanting to hook in what you already have in a more seamless way. Maybe down the line you can switch out that backend catalog for something else. But yeah, for now, that would be my guess as to why. All right. So finally, this is sort of a measly slide. And I sort of teased as to why, but as far as Iceberg REST catalog support goes in Presto, it was actually very easy, I'll say. I don't want to say easy, but simple to add, which was great. So if you navigate to the actual PR, your eyes might be drawn to the the diff, the code diff, and the number is sort of high. But if you do check out that implementation, just note that there's actually 2 commits in this PR, and the bulk of the changes were actually from a refactor. So I sort of refactored how the Iceberg, connectors catalogs were organized, which is great. Everyone loves good refactor. But if you just focus on the REST catalog support commit, you'll see that it's actually, not a ton of change. And the reason is, due to this concept of the native catalogs and Iceberg and how Presto talks to them. So a lot of the plumbing, I guess I'll say, was already present in Presto in order to add support for the REST catalog. Just based on the way that Presto accesses the Iceberg library, all that really needed to be done was, defining the configuration properties that you need to set up when you're first connecting. That includes some of the common properties, like what I mentioned before. You're going to need to identify what type of catalog you have, as well as the location of your data warehouse. And then for REST specific properties, we have, of course, the server URI where you're going to talk to the actual REST service. And you can specify auth type, either none or OAuth2 are the options now. It defaults to none. If you choose OAuth2, you also have a property where you can specify your credentials or your token that you're using. There's also REST user session support, which bad timing for this talk is actually just notified on Monday is not working. So I have some work to do to figure out why that is. So if you're interested in that particular piece of things, you'll probably have to wait until Presto 291. But yes, in theory, you're able to authenticate with a user session to your REST server. And then yeah, all Presto really does in this case is validate the properties that were entered and passes them along to the Iceberg library, which is what does the actual identification of the catalog that you're using. And then that handle that it returns is what is used when we're doing any operations on the table, creating, updating, dropping, all that good stuff. And yeah, it does not include a server implementation. You know, it's similar to the Hive Metastore. You still have to bring your own Hive Metastore. Same deal with REST. You still have to bring your own REST server. But in the demo, I can sort of show you how those pieces hook together. And that's all I had for the part where I'm just talking. So if there's any questions up until this point, I'm happy to take them now or during the demo.
I think we're good. I don't see any. If you also want to get off mute and ask, you're welcome to do that. But if not, let's just go to the demo.
All right. Yeah, feel free to interrupt me. Let me get all my windows here. I guess I have them.
Lead.
Hey, Hamid, do you have a question? Hamid, do you have a question?
No, sorry.
Okay.
All right. So I structured this demo in Docker Compose format. So like I said, we'll figure out some way I'll host this somewhere. Or you can ping me in the Presto Slack or something and I can send this to you. But what we're doing here is just setting up our, all of our relevant services and hooking them together. And then I'll go through and like do some queries and we can see what happens in each of the different services. So the Presto service is pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be our Presto cluster. The only thing I'll really point out here is the volume that we're mounting into this container, which includes our properties file. So, you're probably familiar with what this looks like, but some of these properties are REST specific, and we will see what, where these values come from as we're looking at the Docker Compose file a little closer. But yeah, specifying our data location, our REST server location, that our catalog type is REST, all that good stuff. We're also using, as promised, Tabular's Docker image for the REST service. We're naming it, and then we'll take a look at the code quickly. It's actually really, really lightweight, as mentioned. But the way that you configure it is via environment variable. So we're going to pass these variables into the container, which again, just specify like where our warehouse is, what type of file system we're using. We're going to use S3, what our endpoint actually is for that S3 storage, and also what our backing catalog implementation, like how to contact it. And our backing catalog is going to be a Postgres database. So naturally, we're going to have a Postgres service as well. I think all that's required here are a username and password standard, as well as the actual database that we're going to use to store all of our Iceberg specific catalog information. And lastly, MinIO is going to be our storage. Don't have much to say about that. It's, S3, if you don't know what MinIO is, it's like an S3 compatible storage. It's open source. So it's great for testing, but it's also used in production as well. Okay, let me also show. So to run all that, I just did a Docker compose up. I did that before. Yes, so everything was started. Let's take a look real quick at the actual source code for the REST server image that we're using. So it's only 2 files, one of which is very, very short. But essentially what we're doing here, this is the main function where we're standing up our server. And this line is taking all of the environment variables that we set and creating our connection to our underlying catalog. So they did a nice job, I think, with the in-code documentation here. So they're translating those environment variables to the catalog properties, adding defaults in case you don't specify all of them, but we have already specified those. It's actually going to configure that warehouse location so that it knows where we're going to be pointing to with our tables. And finally, with that, creating an Iceberg catalog context. And that's just the object by which Iceberg tracks all of our catalog access methods. And yeah, so we're using that context. We're essentially creating a catalog adapter. That's what Iceberg refers to it as, is sort of an adapter, which makes sense because we're adapting JDBC to work with our REST server. So like I mentioned, you can change via environment variable this backend catalog. You just change the values of those environment variables, and you might have to also include some additional dependencies, but it's not difficult to change this to work for however you want to test it. And then, yeah, it starts up a servlet. This REST catalogs adapter class is even more simple. It's just, creating that plumbing that the server will use in order to, hook into the Iceberg library, specifically with the JDBC backend in our case. And it just calls super to handle all its requests. Yeah. So yeah, it's very lightweight. It's a great, at least for me, when I was first, testing this out a few months ago, really helpful to step through this and see, what all is being controlled by the REST server and what isn't. Okay, that's it. I can move these away. Okay, so let's see it in action a little bit. We have, at least I hope, that our Presto server has started. Let's check. Yes, I guess I should know that because I have the UI up. And I'm also going to open, oh, I should probably zoom this in, shouldn't I? Let me do that. Okay, I'm also going to open the logs for our REST container, a REST server container, I should say. So here you can sort of see that Or can you? If my screen were bigger, you could. You can see that we're getting, you know, in this very first line, it's recognizing that we have to create a JDBC catalog with these properties. And it knows, you know, it picked up that we're using S3 as our file implementation, and then it just goes ahead and starts, you know, the rest of these are just server specific logs. And then also, let's open up, I guess I don't have to do this quite yet, but I'm also going to go into our Postgres container so that we can see what happens in there as we, you know, make these changes. Pardon my typing. I probably should have prepared these commands ahead of time. God. Password? Yes. Question? All right, no worries. That gives me time to take a sip of coffee. Okay, so we've done all that. Now let's actually go into our Presto container CLI and show catalogs. There should, of course, be an Iceberg catalog in here. Luckily, there is. So yeah, we'll just start at like square one. And we don't have any schemas or tables yet. So I guess first we can create a schema. Actually, first, let's just show here that our Metastore is set up. So this first line here is specific to our, you know, our Iceberg catalog storage that we defined. And then if we list the tables in there, you can see there's two. One is keeps track of all of the namespace properties, and one keeps track of, you know, all of the tables, as you know, as I alluded to in describing what a catalog is responsible for. If we query this, and I think, yeah, classic SQL syntax, luckily for me, but you'll see we have nothing in here, which makes sense. Why would we? We haven't done anything yet. So let's do something. So we'll start with creating a schema. I'll title it min.io. And when we do so, we want to provide a location, which is just our data warehouse. Okay, luckily that worked. And now if we go back to our, you know, where we have our Metastore, we should see that we have a schema actually, which is great. And it knows the location that that data will reside in, and it exists. So great information. I don't think the REST server has anything to say about that. Again, since it is fairly minimal, there's not a ton of logging that we're going to see here. We'll see a little when we do some table creation. But definitely, if you want to try this out on your own, definitely add some logging if you're interested in that, or you can just step through it, of course. But yeah, all right, let's create a table. I'm just gonna select a table from the TPCH database just for ease of demonstration. So that'll take just a little bit. And our Iceberg REST server does have some things to say about this. So at first you'll see here that there was an error, which might be surprising considering we saw no error, in the Presto CLI. But what's essentially happening is when we go to create the table in Iceberg, there's a check to see if the table already exists. And this specific REST server implementation, throws that error when it finds that the table doesn't exist. This, this isn't strictly necessary. If you wanted to re-implement it, you could avoid this, knowing that, if, say, add some logic, like if this is a table create statement, don't throw the error that the table doesn't exist, because hopefully it doesn't. So the server caught that error, handled it, moved on, and then actually did go on to create the table. And you can see here that, we're doing some logging from within the Iceberg library itself, in these base metastore classes. And yeah, you'll see that, it refreshed the table metadata. Refresh here is, sort of a catch-all term. It's not necessarily refreshing the metadata, it's creating it. But yeah, we have our first snapshot file. So if we go here again to our Postgres database, can make sure that the table is in there, and it indeed is. And as promised, it's keeping track of, the pointer to where that metadata file will live. And that will be used by any subsequent requests whenever it's, trying to query data. Just checks for this pointer, and then, everyone gets on the same page about where this data is, and it can go retrieve the data for you. So yeah, that's pretty much, I guess we could add something into this table to show that the update occurs. What's a country? Cambodia. I don't know if this is sad that I have memorized all of the columns that are available in this nation table, but okay. So we'll insert some data. Again, it was successful, so just for, oh, I keep forgetting the word from. Great, it's in there as expected. And then again, we have just a lot of logs from Iceberg itself coming through the server. This time we did not get the error about the table not existing, because the table does exist now. And the refresh statement here is a little more accurately termed refresh now, because we do in fact have a new metadata file, a new snapshot file. Ooh, ugly. That we're referencing now, which is tracked also in our backing catalog Postgres database. So ignore the terrible formatting here, but it's listing the previous location as well as the current, which is just a little extra credit for Postgres to do for us. I don't think it has to do that. So yeah, I think that's about it. Happy to take any questions that might have arisen in the last few minutes, or I can take questions on Slack, really anywhere.
All right. Thanks, Kiersten. That was awesome. I'm doing a refresh on LinkedIn. I think all the questions on LinkedIn were answered, which is cool. Awesome. Any questions in Zoom before we say goodbye to folks? All right. Amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. This was nicely attended across LinkedIn and Zoom, so appreciate everybody making it and spending some time with us today. Reminder, please, if you are not in our Slack channel, join it. It's prestodb.slack.com, I think, off the top of my head, but you can find it through the prestodb.io website. This is where we all hang out. This is where our engineers are. It's a great resource if you need help troubleshooting or just getting started. Great place to be. We do these virtual monthly meetups monthly. And so keep an eye out for the next one, which we'll be scheduling here in the next few weeks or so. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you, Kiersten. This is great. There's also a blog associated with this on the PrestoDB website. So take a look at that as well. It kind of talks more about all the stuff that we've been working on with Iceberg, which is great. Okay, I think we're good. So thanks, Kiersten, again. Appreciate it. Awesome session. And we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you so much. I want to ask something that can I ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I'm a recent pass out student. I did something that the Java, core Java and the advanced Java, JDBC and something else. That I'm not that much expert. I'm a recent pass out student. So that I want to ask something that as someone who did the Java, the standard edition and the enterprise edition. So that is the Java is relevant in the industry 2024, 2025 or something?
Sorry, I don't know if it's my connection or what, but I couldn't hear everything you said.
Can you repeat it? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is a mismatch. Also, I am saying that I am a recent pass out student. I joined this meetup to get some experience. I'm not expert that much. So I want to ask that I did a Java Standard Edition and a Java Enterprise Edition, and I'm learning the Spring Boot. So basically, I want to ask that learning the Java Spring Boot is relevant in 24, 25, 26.
Unfortunately, I have no knowledge or on that topic.
Hey, Saeed, I
Okay.
think that might be join our Slack channel and post your question in our general channel, and we'll get some folks that know that technology a little better to help. To know that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Could you please share me the link
Yeah,
in
let me find it. Give me a
comment?
sec. Yeah, yeah. All right. I'm gonna post it in our chat here. There you go. Okay, I think we're good. So join us in Slack if you have any more questions, and we'll see you at the next meetup, we hope. Thanks, everyone.